Thomas Paine called America humanity's last best hope, not because it was some blatant random idea that America is just fundamentally great. It's that what America is trying to pull off is fundamentally impossible. The history of humanity is one of violence. The history of humanity is not one of peace. The history of humanity is the one of meeting words with the spear instead of a conversation. Disagreement is met with ethnic violence. So the notion that we're building a society of 330 million people and growing that is going to try and navigate some of its most pressing issues in one of the most changing and rapidly evolving times, that's a really awesome thing to pull off. And I think humanity would be better for it.
All right, so I'm Jackson. I'm going to be one of our incoming vice presidents of Bridge Davidson, and we're very grateful to have you guys all out here at our Bridge and DCI Deliberate event today. And so before we get into some introductions, we want to quickly go through what the event is going to look like tonight. We're going to have three main components. Our first component is going to be a deliberative debate with our lovely panelists over there. And then we'll have a chance for some audience Q&A, ask the tough questions like why deliberate, and maybe belabor some of the things that they're about to talk about. And then after that, we'll have the opportunity for an interactive dialogue workshop with our wonderful Bridge team. And alongside that, we will also have the chance to indulge in some delicious Chipotle. And so get excited. Oh, there we go. Hey. All right, so okay, this is a little loud. We're good. So quickly, I want to introduce to those of you who don't know what Bridge is. I'll give a quick introduction. So Bridge is a nonpartisan, student-led organization that looks to bridge the political divides across college campuses. They currently have over 100 college chapters, and they are currently the fastest-growing student-led initiative across college campuses. And so they do this in a couple of ways. They host conversation spaces like this, but also just like student-led conversation spaces for a variety of topics. And they also bring in speakers for events, kind of like the other organizations on campus hold. But we really try to leverage our chapter connections and our speaker network for that. So stay tuned for that. And with that, I will hand it over to Madeline.
Hi, I'm Madeline. I'm going to be the chapter president of BridgeUSA at Davidson, and I'm really excited to launch this new chapter and become a part of an organization that now, like Jackson said, is all over the country and just increase opportunities for viewpoint diversity here, really give students more chances to talk with people across the political spectrum and learn about different viewpoints and some different opinions. So I'm really, really grateful for the Bridge team and Manu for coming here, and it's just such an honor to have you guys here. Great to promote our new chapter and get our name out there, and hopefully we can get some great participation this spring in discussions and maybe some other events. So I'm really excited.
Woo!
Yeah, so if you're interested at all in getting involved in this new BridgeUSA student chapter, certainly reach out to Madeline or Jackson, or I think Cameron, Casey also are involved, and there's a lot of other students who've expressed some interest. So I'm excited for it. Just by way of introduction, my name's Graham Bullock. I'm professor in political science here and also the faculty director of the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative, and I'm excited about having a BridgeUSA chapter on campus to complement the work of the DCI and to, in some ways be a kind of entry point into what the DCI is doing, and also something for our fellows to work on and contribute to after they complete their fellows program. And so really we can work together with them to foster efforts to bridge divides and have conversations about contentious topics among students and faculty and staff and community members. So I'm up here to actually introduce Manu Meel, who is our guest, along with several of his colleagues from BridgeUSA. Manu is the CEO of BridgeUSA, and he's really, and the founder of it, and he's really responsible for building this amazing network of, I think, over 120 chapters across the country on college campuses. And he's a real leader in the field. He's a great advocate for stretching ourselves, growing into comfort around discomfort, around efforts to engage with issues and topics that are hard, right? But that are really important. And he's been a great advocate nationally for this work, and I've known him for several years, and we're also have a UC Berkeley connection, and just really excited to have him here to share his thoughts. He's going to speak for a few minutes, and then we're going to have several Davidson students, as Jackson was saying, to join him on the stage to really kind of challenge him a little bit. These are students who are DCI fellows, and they're trained in how to be devil's advocates and how to channel and steelman perspectives that they may disagree with. And so they're going to be up here, they've coordinated, and they're going to have some questions for Manu about the big question of why deliberate? Why do this work, right? And explore the hesitations, the concerns that a lot of us have, especially right now in the world that we're in. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Manu Meel to the stage to share his thoughts.
Well, hello everybody, how we doing? I heard Steph Curry came from this school. That's like the one fact I know. So I was told Steph Curry came to Davidson, and I was like, got it, I'm locked in. It is awesome to be here. Let's just give a big round of applause for Dr. Bullock and the DCI fellows and everybody here for all their hard work. I should also say hello to the live stream, and Christian, I know the setup's a little different, so if I'm off frame, just let me know. It's a privilege to be here. I'm grateful to be here. Whenever we get the chance to launch a new chapter, we always take that opportunity because we learn a lot from different colleges, different students, different political moments. And I'll just say that the reason why we've picked the topic of why deliberate is because I think one of the best ways to build support for the work of dialogue and conversation is to actually discuss the merits and also the flaws of conversations. I know all of us have friends, peers, there's political leaders out there in the country. There's a lot of friction. There's a lot of reasons to not do this work. There's a lot of critique for it. And yet at the same time, I'm sitting in a room full of people that are now DCI and dialogue fellows and dialogue evangelists and hopefully some dialogue skeptics. But I'll just tell you that when we started this work in 2017, which was my freshman year at UC Berkeley, I was actually a pre-med student. Some of you all know this. My mom is still confused. She's like, what are you doing? And at this point, I'm like, honestly, it would have been easier to be a doctor, Mom, given some of the work that we do on college campuses. But essentially, what happened was February 2nd, 2017 was a day that changed the trajectory of my life. We had a speaker come to UC Berkeley named Milo Yiannopoulos. And some of you may know who Milo is, some of you may not, but he was sort of a provocateur, and he would show up to campus and he would stir the pot a little bit. And I distinctly remember I was walking back from my math seminar, and out there in the distance we heard protests, and there's helicopters flying overhead. Now this is Berkeley, so none of this is different. This is sort of all par for the course, all right, another protest on campus. And yet we walked past a cafe, and inside the window was broken in. There's a screen that said CNN, UC Berkeley students protest free speech. And what was crazy about that moment was that the TV crew that was filming that, this woman named Kyung La, who's now a good friend of ours, and she's a correspondent at CNN, they were actually standing right next to me. And that was sort of the breaking of the fourth wall. That's where you went from feeling like, oh, I'm just, some rando student walking around to suddenly feeling like a participant. And that night was crazy because the narratives over that day and that evening and the next day were all about either students, hate free speech, students are incredibly violent, or students love a fascist regime and students love Donald Trump. And President Trump had just been elected a month after, so you can sort of understand why it was a little difficult and challenging at that moment, right? And yet, both of those narratives were missing something. And that was what most students on campus were frankly feeling, which was this is crazy. This is crazy. Not the protests, but the violence. What's crazy is that we live at a moment where people are so challenged that our democracy is at a point where we're unable to actually not only deliberate, but hear each other across lines of difference. And there was this majority of people, students on our campus, that felt that way that no one had heard from. And we'd called this the silent majority. And so the next day, me and some random people, we came on Sproul Plaza, and we started building a space for conversation. One of those people who's now my best friend is the co-founder of BridgeUSA. We were like, let's just have a conversation with the students. So we were like, let's invite the protested and the protesters into one room. Now, you should be thinking, that's an incredibly naive idea. Manu, after the largest protest in the history of Berkeley since the 60s, since Dr. King came to campus, you're going to invite groups of people that fundamentally hate each other, that everyone in the media would tell you are at odds, into a room, is like, go back to being a doctor. And I was like, all right. So we hosted that event. We called it Bridge Berkeley. 75 people showed up to that first event. 30 of them left in the first 3 minutes because they thought it was a civic architecture frat because the logo was literally a bridge. That's sort of like the level of amateur hour that we were starting at. And so we rehosted that conversation. And the following week, we had these students in a room. And the Berkeley administration was like, we don't want this to happen. By the way, 3 weeks ago, they actually rewarded us with the work of dialogue 9 years after that event. So one thing that they were very critical of in that moment, and I'll tell you why there's massive institutional changes happening. And man, that conversation was insane. Because everyone showed up in a room just like this, rounds, with all the critiques of conversation. It's like, my identity's on the line. I'm being challenged in a lot of different ways. I feel like I'm unable to actually be heard, whether you're a conservative or a liberal. And so my friend Ross was like, let's just lead with vulnerability. Like, tell me a little bit about your mom. Where are you from? Who are your siblings? Like, what actually drives you? Tell me about the human, not the Republican Manu Meel or the Democrat Manu Meel. If you're wondering, by the way, where I stand on the political spectrum, no one knows. You can Google it. Chat will say unidentified. So that conversation was fascinating because it demonstrated that we radically underestimate the power of listening, and we radically overestimate how divided we are. So how does that link into this broader conversation? Because right now, we live in a moment, whether you're on the left or the right, with all that's happening with, whether it's the Charlie Kirk assassination, whether it's ICE protests across the country, whether it's ICE raids, whether it's the question of the 2026 midterms, none of this work scales or matters if it can't address some of the hottest questions in the room. Does that make sense? Because oftentimes we have these conversations around dialogue and people say, this just exists in a vacuum. You can have your little conversation. The New York Times last year called this the Kumbaya Industrial Complex. I was like, at least we're not part of the military industrial complex, but I'll take it. Why do they call us the Kumbaya Industrial Complex? Because the idea is that you're building a political movement that is directly taking power away from one party or the other and channeling it into talking. Which, by the way, the founding fathers, in my view, would have said is the most American thing you could be doing. This idea that we live in one of the most divided times in American history. Imagine I told you there's a society out there with 330 million people, all of whom look differently than each other, heavily armed, trying to have a conversation about the future of our country. That is aspirational. America is an awesome aberration. It's not meant to exist. And the work of conversation, the work of dialogue, what our college students have done across the country is the fastest growing student movement in the country, one that is now rivaling some of the largest organizations that you've heard of in the news, is this fact that conversation is now the counterculture. Conversation is now the counterculture. When we started in 2017, the norm was let's listen to each other, and what was disruptive was protest and violence. Today, the norm is protest and violence, and what is disruptive is dialogue. It is much easier today to join an ideological camp, and it is much more difficult to say to your friends when they're outraged when they see an ICE video on Instagram, to say, I actually want to figure out how we solve this problem. So I'll end with this. One of the questions we oftentimes get is, I can't have this conversation because my identity's online. Who's heard that critique? Everyone has heard that critique. I can't have the conversation because my identity is online. So in 2023, I was at an event of a partner organization called Braver Angels, and we were in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. By the way, don't go to Gettysburg in July. It's hot. Showed up to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, sweaty, at this debate. And the topic was, is America the greatest country in the world? I was like, wow, way to bridge a divide, guys. Is America the greatest country in the world? So about 5 to 6 speakers in, this older white woman stands up, and she looks the moderator in the eyes, and she says, how dare you ask this question? My grandparents fought in World War II. My uncle fought in Vietnam. My kids, one of them got injured in the global war on terror. America's not only the greatest country in the world, but my parents and my family bled for this country. A real story, a real perspective. About 2 speakers later, this African-American gentleman stands up in his 40s. He owned a barbershop in Philly, which is, I think, where you're from, Stephen, right? That's right. I'm so sorry for you. So, he owns a barbershop in Philly, right? And he stands up and he looks her in the eyes and he says, while your grandparents were fighting the Nazis in Europe, my grandparents couldn't drink out of the same water fountain. So, I was like, I should have been a doctor. And my hands started shaking. We didn't really know what to do. It was sort of a very challenging moment because we're talking about why deliberate. Can you actually talk about the most challenging issues of our time? Like, no bullshit. Tell me you can actually have dialogues. Manu, if you're going to stand up there and you're going to say, we need to build a movement, a counterculture around the need to listen to people that are different than us, tell me that we can litigate and challenge the most important issues of our time. So in the reflection period, the white woman stands back up. And she looks the gentleman in his eyes because there's some reflection going on. People are talking about, again, why they were there, what's the point. And she looks him right in the eyes with tears. And she says, I want to apologize to you about the sins of my grandparents. So this gentleman stands right up, right after that, because he felt guilt from her. He felt like she had transgressed from being a fellow human to an evil person. And he looked her in the eyes and said, I appreciate your apology, but I want you to know that the fact that we can have this conversation at this moment means that I believe America is the greatest country in the world. Now, this has nothing to do with whether or not America is the greatest country in the world. The point is, and the reason why I share that story with this audience, because we know our audiences really well. We know the communities we talk to. And we know that Davidson's a more progressive community. There's a lot of stories of folks on the conservative side. My job is to show up and live in your footsteps and meet you where you are. Because, this is the last thing, the greatest social change makers of the 20th century, from Mahatma Gandhi in the 40s and the Salt Marches to Dr. King and civil rights in the 60s to Mandela in South Africa in the 90s. What they all understood was that democracy is a puzzle. You got a lot of tools in your toolkit. You got free speech, you got civil disobedience, you've got violence, you've got dialogue, you got journalism. The question isn't what tool is right all the time. The question is to judge the moment and ask yourselves, what tool is going to allow me to create change at this time? So I'll just remind you that by 2045, the United States is going to be the most diverse society in the history of societies. By 2050, we're going to have levels of technological change that have never happened in the history of humanity. And by 2075, we're going to have a society that will fundamentally look like one that none of us can ever imagine. And I ask you, how do you create change in that world? Why deliberate? The question I would ask you is, what's your alternative? What do you got? Let's recount what the last 10 years have achieved. This is not about denigrating different modes of action. It's about asking what is the right tool for the moment. And so the piece that I want to leave you with, as I welcome some amazing student leaders on who have thought about some of the critiques and challenges that they've faced, is to remember that this is not just about sitting around a table and having a conversation. What this is recognizing that dialogue and bridge building are going to be 21st century skills. They're going to be as important as being competent in artificial intelligence. Every day we get phone calls from members of Congress, from consulting firms, from the American Medical Association, which is where we gave the keynote in March, to thousands of physicians. And the number one thing that all of these institutions have in common is that the biggest scarce resource currently, tomorrow, and especially in the financial markets, when artificial intelligence becomes dominant, is credibility and trust. If we don't know how to build trust, we're not only not going to have a society, but we're going to have massive factionalization. And during the panel, we're going to have a conversation about actually where I see the hope and optimism. But I'll just say, the fact that I'm in a room 9 years later, after being called a fascist more times than I can count, because I'm the spitting image of one, sitting here talking to you and with you about the value of dialogue is just one piece of evidence. After the tragic Charlie Kirk assassination, someone that I knew through our work, BridgeUSA grew at 100 followers an hour for 32 straight days. There's a counterculture in this country. Our students resoundingly said that we need dialogue because our lives depend on it. So I'm really, really excited to have a conversation with your community about how we can actually have conversations in this moment and create a world of more effective dialogue, but more importantly, as I had said in the Man on the Street interviews, Dialogue Davidson. We're at Dialogue Davidson. All right, let's welcome everybody up here.
Hi, thank you everyone for being here, and thank you, Manu, for having us up here. My name is Saren. I'm a current DCI fellow. I'm also on the executive board of the Davidson Democrats, and I'm up here because on one hand, I really care about our democratic principles and the kind of advocacy and activism side of things, but also think that deliberation is a really integral and crucial part of that, and that learning how to kind of engage with the other side is an essential part of that entire mission. So, cool. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for having us. My name is Katie. I'm also a DCI fellow, and I think a big reason why I'm really interested in having this conversation is because obviously Davidson is a really small school, and I think we always hear this sentiment that we kind of live in a bubble, and I think that really extends to the conversations that we have here as well. So kind of talking about different ideologies and different viewpoints, I think, is really important to discuss.
Cool, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Steven. I'm a DCI co-convener and a senior here at Davidson. I've been involved with our campus Republicans. I've been an RA. I've done a few roles on campus. And what brought me to this conversation is I've witnessed the DCI do a lot of work to bring in skeptics, and it really inspired me. And I want to support our efforts with the new Bridge chapter here tonight to continue that work and to really think through how we can reach out to skeptics and to really welcome them into these very important conversations.
Thanks,
so, yeah.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Logan. I'm also a senior here. I'm a co-convener like Steven. I've been involved with the DCI for 3 years now. I think the main reason I'm here is I've witnessed kind of firsthand in my personal life how an inability to effectively talk through difficult issues can lead to relationships fragmenting. And so I'm here because I want to see people learn how to engage with each other on challenging issues, and instead of destroying relationships, build relationships with one another.
That's awesome. Well, thanks Logan, for joining us. And let's just give him a big round of applause for coming on stage. So, I know the reason why we wanted to have this conversation was I wanted to come to your campus. Instead of doing just a very long speech for like 40 minutes, I wanted to spend 20 minutes actually hearing from you what are some of the biggest challenges you hear. So let's just get into it. So Sarah, maybe you want to go first?
Yeah, definitely. So in the spirit of picking up on the most contentious issues, like you said in your piece, and my community is a part of the Davidson Democrats, I think a big sentiment that we hear is that we're not living in normal times right now, and that we shouldn't act like we're going about normal times throughout American history because we're seeing unprecedented erosion of the rule of law. We have masked ICE agents in the streets. 2 people have been killed in Minnesota. ICE has detained a 5-year-old. And that would our energy not be better spent towards organizing and kind of raising our voices as high as we can within those who agree with us to work towards policy change and just focus our attention rather than trying to engage with the other side in ways where we might not necessarily even reach an agreement. Would that time not be better spent sort of fighting for that direct policy change?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great question because it actually builds off of where we ended, which is dialogue actually a method to create change? Or are there more effective ways to spend your time? If we had more time, I would actually ask you how you define normal times. But what I would just point at is, I don't know if you saw this, this was a little small thing that happened in the environmental movement about 3 days ago, but President Trump just repealed the EPA ruling from 2009 that got all climate. Now, one of my good friends, Vaishali, who built this thing called Sunrise Movement, which is the largest progressive climate movement in the country aimed at marshaling young people, sorry, you've seen my back. She started this organization, Saren, in 2015. If you'd asked her, and she and I disagree on this, if your theory of change is going to yield to a rollback of the most landmark climate legislation 10 years later, I don't think that would have been in her cards. And the reason why I bring that up is because we live at a time where organizing reaches your 30%. And the fact is that we live in a jam-packed moment where we have to be able to build coalitions with people that are fundamentally different than us. And the reason why I think people are not, let's say, on the side of whatever side you're focused on is not because they're evil people, which is, I think, what's starting to happen in American politics. It's because we live in such disaggregated media bubbles. And so my job is to figure out how to at least get those bubbles to clash a little bit and to develop that progress. But I would just ask, name one issue that is progressive, that's focused on identity, or that is focused on social justice, and tell me where we've made progress over the last 10 years versus where there's been rollback.
Thank you for your answer. I actually do want to reference another anecdote from your speech that made me think of a sort of a follow-up question, but you invoked the founders and their ability to have conversations. And one of the things the founders were not able to agree on is the slavery question. And they had debates over this, it's well documented, and there was not a conclusion. We formed a country where the North and South had very different laws and approaches to slavery. Founding fathers were, like John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, were staunch abolitionists, but George Washington, Thomas Jefferson were slave owners themselves. And they weren't able to resolve this issue through conversation, and it led eventually, and this is a consensus view, to a civil war. And so my thing, and this is something I've heard from a lot of people, is not all issues can be solved through conversation necessarily. Some things, either one side has to be right or the other. And although that's a historical anecdote, a lot of people feel that way about many issues today. So I would love to hear your response to this skepticism. I think most of us can agree we've heard from friends and people we know in the Davidson community about, the futility of conversations, that talking isn't enough to reach conclusion or actually affect policy, and that it's not necessarily a given that even if we put a lot of time in, we're going to convince each other or find some sort of consensus or at least stable compromise. So I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
That's such a good
critique.
question. I think you articulated it really well. If you noticed, Graham introduced BridgeUSA not as a student dialogue organization, but as a student dialogue movement. And here's what I mean by movement. One of the things that I was hoping y'all would ask about, and this would sort of explain, I think, the political angle of this, is we all have conversations here. How does this actually build up to real world change? The fact is, today in our politics, the incentive to solve problems does not exist. It's not that we can't resolve our issues. It's not that we are at absolute gridlock. It's that the people that are in power, especially in Congress, would rather be TikTok stars than they would actually want to listen to each other. We're living during the weirdification of politics, where the people that want power show up to Congress, and the people, the way our founders would have thought about it, the people that actually want to solve our problems are staying away from it with a 10-foot pole. So what's the opportunity? Why did we call BridgeUSA counterculture? My view on this, Stephen, is that you have to shift the incentive structures. We currently have what I call the 10% problem. And here's what the 10% problem is. There are currently 150 million users on X. Of 150 million users, 15 million create 80% of the content online. In our primaries, take this locality. I know your congressman's coming tomorrow, Tim Horton, who we know. He's showing up. How many people vote in your primaries? 10% of the electorate. So what's happening is it's not that we live on issues that are as onerous and impossible to bridge the divide on as slavery. The problem is that the people that get filtered through the end, the people driving our discourse, I call this the crazy uncle problem in some ways. It's the loudest, most extreme elements, and importantly, they're not bad people. But my point is, you can be a bridge builder and have strong viewpoints. And so I think you actually have a political and generational opportunity. If you ask me what the president of our, and you can put my money on this right now because that's what BridgeUSA is built on, as we go to Katie, is like, I think the political leaders of the next 20 to 30 years are going to figure out how to build coalitions, not on the left-right, but on a new divide. And I think once you start to build it on those new divides, you can rupture and create possibility to solve some of those very pernicious issues.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I kind of wanted to touch on a point that you just mentioned about how the people that tend to be more involved in conversation nowadays and dialogue tend to be the loudest. And I think another big criticism that people might have about deliberation is that it ruins families or family relationships and just like the social relationships that you have with people. Yeah. And I think that a lot of people don't want to risk that. And I'm sure we all know people relate to the idea of, I don't associate friendships with politics and I just don't want to discuss it at all because you don't want to risk that relationship from failing. So I'm curious what you think about that, people that would be afraid of that and are hesitant to be involved in conversations involving politically contentious topics out of fear that they're going to risk relationships.
If you don't mind me asking, Katie, do you have like personal stories around this, like with family challenges?
Yes, I will say I do tend to avoid political conversations with my parents because it definitely has led to arguments. Yeah. But even at Davidson, I will say that I've had conversations regarding this as well. Recently, a chapter of Turning Point USA started at Davidson, and I personally know people that have told me that they're going to boycott the organization and not be involved with it at all, out of risk of ruining friendships and just because of how small the school is. Yeah. So I'm curious how you would respond to people who feel that way. So
just briefly on this boycotting thing. The only reason why people still know Milo Yiannopoulos is because people protested him out of a hallway in 2017 at UC Berkeley. Yeah, that's the only reason that man still has a platform. And that man raised money. And that man exists. And in case you don't know who that is, you can Google his name. Him and Kanye and Nick Fuentes are like the triad of the Death Star, I guess. And so, question I would actually ask, it was the same argument in 2017. It's like, we're going to shut down this event because we disagree with it. We live at a moment where shutting down the event just gets streamed online. Your shutdown might shut down this room, but there's 100 million people outside of that room that are going to watch that stream. So the question that I ask you again is, what is the right tactic? The second piece to your point about family politics I think is so right, and I'll tell you, we raise the most money around Thanksgiving. And the reason for that is because people want to know how they can actually listen and engage. What I'll share is we have 4 discussion norms. Jaya is going to run a workshop at the end after this that I would really encourage everyone to stay for, because we're actually going to dive into some of those qualities and tactics that you can deploy in those family-based conversations. Okay? So I kind of dodged your question, but it's because we're going to spend the next hour on that. Go ahead, Logan.
Yeah, I want to get a little more into deliberation itself and some of the critiques we hear about it. So one of the ones that I hear a lot is that it reinforces social power inequalities. The fact of deliberating, it requires you to make reasoned arguments, to have a set of facts that you might draw from. And people who are well educated, who have experience with this kind of work, they're at a natural advantage. And those are also the people potentially who are at an advantage in society as is. So through deliberation, it's possible that those who are already advantaged are just furthering that advantage through their ability to articulate their points and make strong arguments. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, it's fascinating. And by the way, I'll just say we're going to take questions right after this question. I'd love for all of you all to stay on stage if you don't mind, so we have a dialogue in that portion too. So if you had a question, and I'm sure you do, I'm sure I've said something that tripped your toes a little bit, please ask that question, and we want to engage. The fact is that when you think about the current moment, and when you think about the reality of dialogue, you can't have a conversation without actually setting the right guardrails and norms for that conversation to unveil. And when you ask, especially that last part of that question, of like, how do we actually ensure that these conversations scale up? How do they grow? How do they create impact? At this moment, there's tremendous silent demand, and that demand, I think, can be scaled up even more if you actually create the social permission for people to have the conversation. Now, can you clarify the last part of your question a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. I think what I'm trying to say is that, I went to college here at Davidson. I'm a senior. I'm about to graduate. I've had a lot of work with forming strong arguments, with writing, with oral communication.
Yeah.
And that gives me a natural advantage when I'm in a setting where I need to deliberate or engage in dialogue. And often there are people who have not had that opportunity, and that just gives me a chance to almost dominate them in conversation and express my viewpoint perhaps more eloquently.
When was do you have like siblings?
Yeah, I have a younger sister.
Okay, how young is she compared to you?
2 years younger than me.
Okay, when was the last time you guys had an argument?
Over winter break.
Okay, when was the last time that facts changed your mind in an argument?
Oh, it doesn't happen too often with me and my sister.
Yeah, so don't worry, my brother would say the same thing. And he would probably say my facts are misinformation. So my point is that every bit of social psychology shows that facts don't change people's minds. What changes people's minds is creating a norm in an environment of trust. Like in the workshop, we'll talk about how to actually build that trust and build human relations. The only reason my brother listens to me, and I listen to him, frankly, and he'd probably say I listen to him less than he does to me, is like you have repeated interactions and engagement. The challenge becomes actually how does that happen at scale? And that's where my view is, and the vision of BridgeUSA, frankly, is you're building a widespread base that isn't just college focused, and you start to propel into communities that creates the social permission structure for political leaders to actually solve problems. Because right now, your congressman, when he shows up tomorrow, the 3 words that will never come out of his mouth, and it's not just a Tim Horn problem, it's a member of Congress problem across the board, is I don't know. And the reason why no one will say I don't know is because no one rewards I don't know. But we are now actually winning online. And what I mean by that is, I'll give you a great example, is Ezra Klein, who's a prominent public intellectual on the left, like, he had this big debate with this guy named Ta-Nehisi Coates. And it was a really focused debate where he was like discussing whether or not Charlie Kirk did politics the right way. And if you watch the comments afterwards, he was like getting eviscerated. Because it was the loudest voices. And I was like, this is just the loudest voices, Ezra. And then our students and we sent out a bunch of mail to his inboxes. He was like, wow, I actually feel like a lot of people do believe what I believe. It's just about giving people the backbone. So most people in your communities want to have the conversation. You're on the right side. It's just about creating this permission structure for it. I know we're so tight on time, especially since we started later. So let's open this up to questions. And if y'all have answers to certain questions, or you want to just be like, I want to follow up on what we talked about, we'll do that. Okay? Your name's Casey, right? Okay.
You mentioned in your response to Stephen that future politicians won't really be, bridging the left-right divide as much, or at least there will be a lot of new divides that they'll be confronting and striving to bridge. What are some of those examples of the, next generation of divides?
I'm curious if you have a thought on this, Stephen. I'll just say that I don't know anyone's politics here, but I would say that most of us are not united necessarily by our ideas. We're united by our temperament, our mindset. Most of us are generally curious people. We're open-minded. We want to solve problems. We believe in the redeemability of fellow human beings, especially the DCI fellows. I think the real divide in our politics is not between left-right. It's between open-minded and closed-minded. It's between people that want to solve problems and people that don't. And you might think that sounds squishy, and yet that is one of the most tangible things I can come up with because it is built on the fact that we need to upgrade our civic fabric so that people out there have an incentive to solve problems. Otherwise, they have to get booted out. It's not that we can't resolve and find middle ground opinions on things like gun control or abortion. It's that everyone has the incentive to stay on an extreme. What do y'all think? Any thoughts here? Does anyone want to jump in? I want to bring folks in.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point about, the future of politics and people who want to be in the room and people who don't want to be in the room. I think I could imagine that being a key part of sort of the future of our social fabric. And I think a key part of kind of what we're trying to talk about here is what you said, how do we get the people who don't want to be involved into the room? And I think that's through showing them that, like, they're going to be heard. Like, it's not like we're some group of elites who want to sit here and make decisions for everyone. Like, it's about getting input from everyone. People who are not in the room, they're invited in, and they're going to be heard. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, or we can go to a question?
I mean, I'll just say quickly, sort of bouncing off Logan, it really is about bringing everyone. It's about a sort of egalitarian sense that you do need to listen to everyone, that people are seeing things out in the world that do matter, that do add value to conversations, and do really add insights that are important, essential many times to building consensus. So,
hi, thank you so much for being here. In the wake of kind of rising extremism, I would say on both sides, maybe in our politic, for example, like you can see a rise in the far right in America and in Europe, and thinking about like platforming and in relation to Charlie Kirk, for example, work he was trying to do you ever wonder if platforming might involve moral complicity or perhaps obscures conscience or something like that?
And what's your name?
Ezra.
Thanks, Ezra. Oh, Ezra. Yeah, from the Davidson Lux.
No, that's me.
Oh, that's you. Oh, that's a different Ezra. I was like, yeah, you guys kind of look different. I'm like, okay, got it. There's two Ezras in the room? Now we just need to bring the third Ezra in. I've actually developed a stronger opinion on this, which is that I think time and time again over the last like 15 years, especially in the age of Trump, deplatforming ideas have only radicalized them further. Like, I've yet to hear an example of deplatforming working at scale. I was actually, first panel I ever did in my life with BridgeUSA was in 2019, which was our junior year, and we were sitting next to two people. One was this guy named Ira Glasser, who was the president of the ACLU when the Nazis marched through Skokie, Illinois, and then the second one was a Jewish Holocaust survivor. And they asked a Jewish Holocaust survivor about free speech. And he was, I think at that time, like 95, 96. And he said in his, deeply somber voice, he was like, restricting free speech is like poison gas. There's no controlling which way those restrictions fly. And that's the reality of platforming. Everyone has a platform today. And everyone can scale up their platform. Do y'all have anything you want to add?
I think this ties really nicely into the things I was mentioning earlier about relationships and people being scared of talking to your friends or family about contentious issues. And I think that deplatforming ideas, to avoid that, I think really kind of speaks to show the risks of deplatforming ideas and not having conversations with people. And I think that really contributes to the extremism that we're seeing today. And I think that not having conversations and deliberations with each other forces people to have assumptions about other people. And I think those assumptions does really cloud what we perceive as morality and what we perceive other people's morality to be. So I really agree that deliberation really speaks to that.
I have a bit of a follow-up question to Ezra's concern. So you were kind of talking about how the Milo Yiannopoulos, Nick Fuentes, Kanye kind of formed like the dark triad. Nick Fuentes was recently on Tucker Carlson, and figures like him are growing in prominence, and other kind of advocates of, I guess, white nationalism or Christian nationalism, whatever you want to call it, that ideology is increasing. And as someone that is concerned about those kinds of views like spreading in prominence, if not deplatforming, how would you, I guess, what's your insight towards people that might be sympathetic to my view of how to sort of deal with that situation?
Yeah, so Saren, what's interesting actually, I'd met Nick before either of us were anything. I think I'd met him like when he was 17. He was like running around the high school speaking thing, and I was doing my thing. And what's interesting is after he started building his platform, he actually got debanked from every banking institution. He couldn't be on any streaming platform. YouTube kicked him off. Rumble kicked him off. He couldn't have a Spotify account. And he came back with a roar over the next 10 years. So you seeing him on Tucker is after he's officially mainstreamed himself, but he got kicked off of everything. The dude couldn't get a credit card. I'm not saying like whether you think you should have a credit card or not, it's not my point. My point is the man got deplatformed and canceled to the extreme. He didn't have an X account. He still doesn't actually have an X account, I think. So, yeah, he got cut from everywhere. And it's not like Tucker picked him up out of obscurity and was like, come on my platform. It was actually after his Rumble stream became the most viewed Rumble stream, independent of Tucker interviewing him, Dave Smith interviewing him, or any other speaker interviewing him. So I think ideas figure out a way, especially in such a fragmented environment. You can't keep them down.
I was going to kind of raise a question, which is sort of similar to what Ezra talked about, which is this idea of like both sidism in deliberation and in dialogue, where if you have an idea that's maybe some would consider extreme, but you give it equal weight to maybe a more sort of centrist idea, that you're basically assigning an equal value to both sides, that could be harmful in terms of, some might argue, I think that this idea is way more extreme, but you're putting on the level playing field, so now they're seen as equivalent. And I'm wondering kind of how you view that and how you respond to that.
Gotta love this one mic situation. This is like the perfect simile for bridge builders. So your platform is only as big as one microphone. This is actually, I think, almost like Saren's question with 2.0, which is, in a bridge dialogue, when you have two people, you are literally giving equal weight. My point and my question would be, what is the goal of success? Like, what are we trying to achieve in this conversation, right? I don't think in a bridge dialogue or in a conversation, we're trying to win a political battle. One of our norms is this is not about winning. It's to listen rather than to respond. The reality is when you walk into a BridgeUSA discussion, you are not going to shift the landscape on the rise of white nationalism. Now, someone may make the argument to me that, well, at scale, if you have, we for example, engage 40,000 students a year and growing. Our goal is to get to 800 chapters for the next 4 years, which is approximately 25% of all colleges in the United States. We're currently 120. We average about 200 to 300 people per chapter. You could say, well, if each one of them held a conversation that was extremely controversial and they platformed those ideas, maybe there's a spillover argument. But my point is, those ideas have resonance whether or not we discuss it or not. So the reality is, like, can we actually build the human trust in civic bonds to prevent radicalization when they go online and they get fed a bunch of bullshit?
Nice to see you again.
Oh, it's the real Ezra. No, I'm kidding.
It's the other one. Yes. So my question kind of speaks to a lot of what we've been talking about radicalization and platforming. So some people have an argument that goes about, like, when someone is platformed that is very extreme and has extreme hateful views, like I'm thinking we're talking about Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson, I'm thinking anti-Semitism, racial hatred of different kinds, homophobia. Some argue that just having that out there is harmful and perpetuates those harmful ideologies. And I wanted to kind of pitch that to you as, is that still worth it, right? Does the value of speaking and deliberating and having different ideas outweigh any harm caused to those populations by kind of popularizing hateful ideologies?
Yeah, so it's a great question. The short answer to that question, there's a short answer and a long answer. The short sort of like dismissive answer to that question is that those ideas are going to be in the ether, whether or not they're discussed or not. But the second point there is that all of American politics doesn't boil down to gun control, abortion, and immigration. There's like 100 other equally consequential issues. Like no one talks about, I don't know, like campaign finance, gerrymandering. What have we talked about climate? What have we discussed disability rights? Like there's like literally 100 issues. And the reality is that we're all being exploited because our politicians want us to live in a reality where it's 3 issues so that they can spend every 2 years coming to your community pretending that they're going to actually solve their issues, but then only campaign on those 3. And then we sort of feed into the outrage industrial complex. The longer response, we can talk about a little bit in the workshops because I want to get to other questions. But I'll just share that young people, like when we started Ezra in 2018, 2019, students would come up to us and they would say, you're actively divesting from the resistance against President Trump. Or on the right, they would say, you're actively divesting from the resistance against the left. And I'm like, that is the outrage industrial complex in a nutshell. Like, people want you to be pissed off. Because if you're a leader and I want your vote, And I don't actually have to sell you a vision. I just have to convince you that Ezra is evil. That is a much easier task. Not saying, Ezra personally, but like it's a much easier task to attack what Ezra looks like, who he is, without actually ever having real substantive engagement. So it's important to like be emotional and be outraged and be challenged. You can make many arguments that Manu, you occupy a certain level of privilege and it's below or above my privilege. But my point is all of us are just being played. We're all being played.
Good evening. First of all, again, thank you for coming here to Davidson.
Absolutely. What's your name?
My name is Aditya.
Aditya, okay.
Yep. Now, the issues we were just talking about, gerrymandering. So it kind of brought up a conversation I had with a friend yesterday concerning, concerning gerrymandering happening bilaterally from both sides of the political spectrum. Now, in the current political scenario that we live in today...
I'll just say from a time standpoint, let's just get to the question.
Yeah, just getting to the question. So he had an interesting opinion. The opinion being that if one side is committing to the process of gerrymandering, the other should do the same. If they're hitting you, there's no point in engaging in conversation because they, for one, are in no mood in engaging in conversation, and number two, they're gaining politically and in an unfair manner. So the question is, in this scenario, wherein people wherein people, number one, are getting pissed off, just as you said, and number two, they're saying, hit back, why are you not hitting back, why are you still committing to conversation? The question is big, is it still worth the while getting engaged into conversation in such a scenario?
I just wanted to add the language of bad faith. We hear a lot.
Yeah.
They're not engaging in this in good faith, they're in bad faith. That often comes across the political spectrum, so building on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So just briefly on your question, the governor of the state that I live in, Gavin Newsom, had this direct argument. What I can tell you is, like, personally, people in power are not interested in fighting fire with fire, because when you fight fire with fire, the whole house burns down. You can't put out a fire with a fire. Now, that assumes you want to put out the fire. That assumes you want to put out the fire. So what I would ask you is, how important is the house to you versus you getting your full room? That's the question. And yes, some people will criticize me. They'll say, well, your work might lead to some compromise. My argument is that, Thomas Paine called America humanity's last best hope, not because it was some blatant random idea that America is just fundamentally great. It's that what America is trying to pull off is fundamentally impossible. The history of humanity is one of violence. The history of humanity is not one of peace. The history of humanity is the one of meeting words with the spear instead of a conversation. Disagreement is met with ethnic violence. So the notion that we're building a society of 330 million people and growing that is going to try and navigate some of its most pressing issues in one of the most changing and rapidly evolving times, that's a really awesome thing to pull off. And I think humanity would be better for it. But if you were a betting person on Mars, you would bet against this experiment every time. Because 250 years, which is going to be the United States anniversary in July, is a minuscule in the context of 10,000 years. So my view is, let's let the candlelight of deliberation shine a little brighter.
Awesome. Just a big thank you again to everyone for being here. I think that this work is so incredibly important, especially for me. I'm from Seattle, Washington, and I had literally never met a Republican until a year ago when I came to school here. So that was a big challenge for me to personally navigate, and DCI was...
Did they all look like Stephen? No.
No comment. But DCI has really been an integral part of my journey there, and I'm so glad that we now have a BridgeUSA chapter here to also complement that. And yeah, I can't thank you all enough for being a part of this conversation as well, so thank you.
Yes, thank you so much again. And I just want to say, I think we talked about this at our DCI meeting today, and I think one of my biggest takeaways from BridgeUSA and just deliberation as a whole is we really need to come into conversations not having an agenda in mind. And I think just building off what you said, this idea of being vulnerable towards other people and just having empathy and humanity for each other is really important. I think this organization does a really good job at embracing that.
Thanks.
Yeah, just quickly, my question at the start, invoked this sort of sense of skepticism I picked up about, whether or not conversation can work and if our, most divisive issues are really solvable. And I think, there are some real feelings that are legitimate that, it can be overwhelming to talk about these things. It can seem hopeless. And I want to say, even, people, criticize my faith in this work and the power of deliberation. I don't actually think it's a bad thing to have faith. And that if you do come here again and again and again with people who you might disagree with, even if you can't predict what's going to happen in conversation, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be having it. I think faith in the power of conversation, deliberation, bridging divides is really powerful. I think it's a good tool. It's a healthy thing, and it really can make this work. This work work. So yeah.
I want you to know, by the way, I said I don't know anyone's politics, but I guess. I want you to know, I think Stephen is the most courageous person on this panel. And here's why. The fact is that these spaces, we talk about inclusivity, and we talk about listening, and we talk about, let's care about people's identity. But how inclusive are we actually? This is not a dig on DCI at all. I think DCI is an amazing program that Dr. Bullock has built. But when I come into environments that are more progressive, the amount of people, and this is the same, by the way, on the conservative side, the amount of people that claim that the other side is bad faith without ever having actually met someone from the other side is shocking to me. And it's really sad. It's really sad because it means that we're going to burn down the house without actually knowing who lives in the damn house. We're going to burn down the house because we're going to listen to the house next door and the crazy person shouting from that house telling us what to think. And so some of those issues, Ezra, are really challenging. Those are red herrings to never even get this work started. My point is, let's just give it a shot. And what you all have built here is amazing. But Stephen, I want to thank you for coming. And importantly, I want more conservatives to show up to these types of spaces. And that's a priority of BridgeUSA. And it's the same when we go to a more conservative campus for liberals to show up. Because we have to at least understand who's in the house. So I appreciate you being here. All right, Logan, let's wrap us up. Bay Area man right here.
I just want to end with a bit of a call to action. I don't think now is the time to be silent. Now is not the time to sit on the sidelines. If you care about this work, show up. The DCI is here at Davidson. Bridge is going to be here at Davidson. Bridge is all over the country. There's so many ways to get involved. Seek them out and go for it.
All right. Thank you all for being here, and let's give another round of applause for Manu and and it's not over yet. So by most of our DCI, we're going to have a panel, and then we have an opportunity